You are joining us for the evening with Mark Lipovetsky. My name is Zarina Zabriskie. I'm a writer from San Francisco, and I curate and produce shows for Globus Books. I'll just tell you a couple of words very briefly about Globus Books. It is a small store with a powerful history. We've been around for 50 years, and we carry a vast collection of books on all things Russia and the former Soviet Union and Russian Empire. We have books not just about Russia, but about other countries of that part of the world, mostly in Russian and in English. We also feature shows in different fields, anywhere from poetry readings and literary translation roundtables to the art lectures and even culinary shows. We also have a big children's books collections, so come and visit www.globusbooks.com or just stop by if you're in San Francisco. We are right next to Cinderella Bakery, and it's a lovely part of town. We'll be happy to see you. We're open. We also ship books. If you can't come to us right now, check out our catalog. I will be introducing Mark Lipovetsky in a second, and it will be my tremendous pleasure because I'm a big fan and I read a lot of articles and some books by Mark, and it was kind of a dream to have him here, and now it's happening. Let me introduce you to Mark. Mark Lipovetsky is professor at the Department of Slavic Languages at Columbia University in New York. He is the author of 10 books, an editor and co-editor of 20 volumes on the 20th and 21st centuries in Russian literature and culture. He is mostly known for his works on Russian postmodernism and this really incredibly thought-provoking work. So I really recommend it, and we'll be carrying some of it too. New Russian drama, The Trickster in Soviet Culture, and Dmitry Prigov. And if you like Dmitry Prigov and his poetry, please check out the show that we did with Mark participating and with a great panel about a month ago. It's in our archives on YouTube channel. Mark Lipovetsky is also one of 4 co-authors of the Oxford History of Russian Literature that was published in 2018. He is a winner of AATSEEL Award for the Outstanding Contribution to Scholarship in 2014, and also Andrei Bely Prize for his input to Russian literature, which he won in 2019. And with that, I am so eager to hear what Mark got to say, and passing the microphone to Mark. Thank you, Mark, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Zarina. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for having me. Thank you, dear colleagues, for coming to my talk. I'm very glad to see among those who I can see my friend Andrei Ustinov and my former student more than 20 years ago, Matthew Boyd. And the difference, if you would show your faces, those of you who are on Zoom, that will be a tremendous help for me. Because as you certainly understand, it's not we are not used to speak to one face or 2 faces, one of which is your own, right? And so it is better to see the faces of the audience. So the title of my talk is on the screen, and I should sort of there should be as usual some kind of a disclaimer, and the disclaimer is that I've been working on this subject of the Soviet tricksters for quite a while, but more or less recently I decided finally to write a Russian version of the book on this subject, and this has led to quite I don't know, dramatic or not dramatic, but quite radical transformations of my initial conception of this subject matter. And so if you have read my earlier works on the Soviet tricksters, please don't be surprised by the discrepancies with what you've read. So that's a very, very fresh version of the same story. The story is similar, but there are some important nuances. So certainly the trickster is a very well-known mythological character, right? And there are numerous tricksters across the world. Basically, every national culture has at least one, frequently more, tricksters. Russian culture in this respect is not very famous, but it also has its tricksters, especially in the fairy tales and tales about animals. That's the place where the tricksters appear. But you can see on the screen, of course, it's far from being exhaustive, but this list includes such famous figures as Hermes, Prometheus, Odysseus, right, Anansi, Escher, and Togo Yurugu, right, Coyote, Rabbit Manaboza, or Viscadyaki, North American Indian mythology, from which the study of the tricksters began, Loki, of course, and up to Herschel Astropoler and Haja Nasreddin. What, and so here a few pictures. I couldn't resist the possibility to show some pictures, right? That's Tilly Spiegel, by the way. And that's the monument to Haja Nasreddin, right? What do they have in common? So so there are a short version and a long version. Short version is this very simple formula: chaos plus freedom. So basically, the trickster, in my understanding, it appears as a mythological character, and then of course it transfers to folklore and then to literature, etc. But it appears as the manifestation of chaos, but chaos that is incredibly attractive because it also has the meaning of freedom. Or we may say that it appears as the manifestation of freedom, but freedom that is incredibly dangerous because it leads to chaos. So this dialectical combination of chaos and freedom is something that explains why the trickster has to appear in every culture. We may say that freedom is a late category, right? That freedom appears much later and is formulated much later. Yes, indeed, it is. It is formulated much later, but multiple myths are about the freedom of choice, right? And the trickster always sort of is a warning about the freedom that leads to destruction, and about the same time attractiveness of this destructive drive, right? And I have here this quotations from two founding fathers of the trickster studies back in 1956. Paul Ryden published a collection of articles and collection of texts about North American tricksters, and I still believe that his and his colleague Carl Karen's definitions are quite apt. Ryden writes, trickster is at one and the same time creator and destroyer, giver and negator, he who dupes others and who is always duped himself. He knows neither good nor evil, yet he is responsible for both. He possesses no values, moral or social, is at the mercy of his passions and appetites, yet through his actions all values come into being. You can see in this description that it's all built on the contradictions, right? So creator, destroyer, giver, negator, right? He is the one who is at mercy of his very much low desires and needs, but these desires are the channel for values, including very important foundational and sometimes high values, right? Some scholars saying that the trickster is the sacred clown who constantly breaks taboo, but by this means the trickster sort of reestablishes taboo, right? Kearney, who was basically the classical philologist and specialist in Greek mythology, he suggests the connection with chaos, right? And he in certain ways, it is quite interesting that in the next paragraph after this, he even refers to Rabelais, and certainly he couldn't know about Bakhtin's work, but the overlap is quite significant. Disorder belongs to the totality of life, and the spirit of this disorder is the trickster. His function in an archaic, or rather, the function of his mythology, of the tales told about him, is to add disorder to order, and so make a whole. There is some mistake here. I don't, to render, I'm sorry, to render possible within the fixed bounds of what is permitted and experience of what is not permitted. And Dionysian ecstasy has the same function as the trickster myth. It abolishes the boundaries, not least the boundaries of sex. And trickster frequently changes sex and travels between different I wanted to avoid the word identity, but couldn't find a fitting synonym for that. Okay, all right. There are more specific definitions of the trickster. For instance, William Hines, the author of the groundbreaking collection of articles from 1993, gives this list of the trickster's features. And it works, and many of these features remain quite applicable to the later tricksters. But we have, of course, to keep in mind that the trickster had come through multiple transformations, right? And even sort of at the bird eye, we can define such sort of descendants of the trickster myth as fool, clown, skomorokh in Russian culture, thief, questionably, some say yes, some say no. Holy fool, jester as the court jester, right? Rogo, picaro, adventurer, imposter, and that's definitely not the same, and not the full list. But even these pictures show how the trickster transforms, right? And then we have multiple appearances of different trickster characters in the world literature, beginning from Renaissance era, right? Here we have Rabelais, Cervantes, and classical picaresque novels, Beaumarchais' Figaro, different variations of the devil, and it all continues in the 20th century. Mark Twain's characters, Hashek's Schweik, of course, Charlie Chaplin's Tramp, etc., 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 up to Barat, which is a classical trickster, of course, by all standards, and even cultural persona of many artists who were playing the trickster as their form of sort of self-promotion, presence in culture, right? So all these transformations certainly separate us from the trickster model in myth and folklore. And here I have designed, I don't know how convincingly, this model, the trickster trope. So the model, and I'm very proud of it, because of course the making such geometrical tables is the skill that nobody teaches us, and we have to learn it all by ourselves. So you can't imagine how many hours I was doing this beautiful thing, right? Kidding, of course. The red geometrical shapes, they stand for the features that I think are more or less permanent. Every trickster is transgressive. Every trickster's acts are ambivalent. They're never definable either as good or as evil. They constantly fluctuate between them. The trickster is associated with laughter. That's the most problematic category of problem. But if we remove the laughter, then the category of the trickster becomes absolutely endless. It won't be possible to set any limit, right? For instance, we may ask the question whether Hamlet is the trickster. And I would say that Hamlet can become the trickster. Sometimes he is very funny. But not always. Not always. He's not the trickster when he's dying at the end of the play. He's not the trickster when he pronounces his famous monologues, right? But when he plays tricks on people, he acts as the trickster. When he provokes laughter, that's where he's working. But among this constant constitutive categories, metaposition is very important for me, right? Where metaposition suggests that the trickster is sort of not entirely within the situation to which he or she belongs, right? And this not belonging or partial belonging can be expressed through a number, and here I wouldn't say that that's the full list of optional characteristics. And for instance, hyperperformativity is the constant performance of different identities or different selves, never being oneself, always donning different masks, right? Liminality is existence outside of the systems, right? On the borders or outside of borders, right? Which also sort of connects with the parodic doubling of the, again, figures that are outside the system. It can be, if we are talking about the social world, parodic doubling of power. Bakhtin used to write that the trickster is the metamorphosis of the god or czar, right? Or it can be a parodic doubling of the author. Alexander Tsiolkovsky recently, and he was returning to this thought several times, the trickster character is appearing as some kind of the associate author that is a parody of the author, and at the same time he's or her representative in the world of the text. And by this means the trickster also sort of, you certainly remember Bakhtin's category of vне находимость, outsideness, and that applies to the trickster very well. But these blue categories, they may appear or may not appear, or some of them appear and others don't, right? So I believe that this model covers on the one hand limited number of cases, but on the other hand this number is quite large, right? So if we are looking at the tricksters in Russian culture, and if we are moving to more or less a modern period, so in 18th century there are several important works. There are several important works. Before 18th century, Frolskabeev, for example. But in 18th century, there is this super popular book about Vanya Krik, written by Matvey Komarov. Later, Shklovsky will write the book about Matvey Komarov as the author of this book included, right? Which is an amazing text, as a matter of fact, because it is sort of, it's based on documents. It's a documentary novel about the trickster, which mixes documents with folk tales about an absolutely abominable character, right? The thief and the murderer who becomes a police slew, and who basically sells all his friends in the profession, but continues to be the thief and the murderer while serving to the police. It's something beyond understanding, and this character is depicted with mixed feelings. There is certain sense of disgust, but there is a very detectable sense of admiration of his sort of not just immorality, but his ability to be beyond his metaposition, in my words. We have the female trickster, which is a very rare character, at least in the 18th, 19th century, but Chulkov's Prigozhaya Povaricha, Pretty Cook, is in certain way the Russian version of Daniel Defoe's Moll Flanders. It's very much transformed, but the original, I think, is detectable there. In the early 19th century, there are attempts to create the picaresque novel, but they sort of slide more or less into the, as Yuri Stritter used to write, sentimental moralistic mode. And then there comes Gogol, right? And Gogol creates this gallery of tricksters, absolutely sort of deathless tricksters, Khlistakov, Sandro of Chegem, right? Which is later continued by Dostoevsky's tricksters from Homich, Svidrigailov, Petrusha, Fedor Pavlovich Karamazov, Smerdyakov, maybe, as much as he's funny. So there are some question marks. And again, devil in one's dreams. But when we are looking at of course, there are many others, but I'm just picking this as examples. But when we are looking at these most famous tricksters in Russian 19th century, what I think unites them is that they're not at all sympathetic. They're all pretty, let's say, unpleasant characters, right? So anyway, the reader doesn't want to identify with these characters as much as with, say, Figaro, right, or even Sancho Panza, right? So it is a very, very strong sense of alienation from these characters. They're immoral, and therefore they are not depicted as appealing characters. I'm saying this, I understand that there's a banalities, but I'm saying this because this is the contrast of the absolute adoration that surrounds the trickster in the Soviet culture. Right, think about Chichikov, Nozdrov, Klistakov on the other hand, and Ostap Bender, and so this adoration, I cannot resist. I know that maybe somebody has how many monuments have been erected to Ostap Bender. That's simply unbelievable. Ostap Bender is the character to whom people want to build monument in every large and not so large city of the former Soviet Union, right? And that's of course Odessa, but Odessa has the entire complex of monuments dedicated to Ivan Petrov novels, right? That's also Odessa. But not only Ostap Bender, other tricksters have attracted as well. So, for instance, I find this monument to Mishka Iponchik, a prototype of Benya Krik, quite sweet. Not only that it is placed right next to the wall of the Jewish cemetery, second Jewish cemetery, I think, but it also depicts the moment that is incredibly tricksterish, right? So here he is in his hat, right, in his gondolier's hat with his cane, right, by the cemetery. And those of us who remembers Odessa Tales remember that cemetery is a very important space there. And what does he do? He steams his feet, some kind of the perverse pleasure, perverse entertainment, right? Something very intimate, which typically people don't do in public. And this combination of intimate and public selves is very, very tricksterish here. But of course, Bulgakov's characters, Venichka Refeev as a part of the double monument that can be found in Moscow, not far from RGGU. And even such now obscure tricksters as, for example, Ded Shukari from Sholokhov's Podnятая Целина, right? And many others. And many others. I'm just showing this as the evidence of this incredible, unbelievable popularity of the Soviet tricksters, right? And further, I will suggest three main sort of approaches to the trickster, and they're partially overlapping. I'm not trying to say that this is a clean cut. And the characters I'm talking about, they frequently will be uniting different parts of my presentation, but that's okay. And also, so there are these three approaches, three aspects of the trickster. I almost won't be talking about Ostap Bender, but please keep him in mind, because Ostap Bender unites these three approaches in himself, and that's what makes him so important for the overall understanding of this phenomenon. So one of the important sort of grounds for the understanding of the trickster is cynicism, right? And of course, cynicism is not the Soviet category, but it is the modern category. And Peter Sloterdijk, a German philosopher, in his famous critique of cynical reason, has associated cynicism with the disappointment in the Enlightenment, basically with the failure of the Enlightenment, right? And sort of simply put, the cynicism, according to Sloterdijk, is a form of conformism, right? But conformism that is ironic and self-ironic. That sort of is not knowing what is happening and what's going on, and with what character is conforming, right? The trickster is constantly split in multiple personalities and multiple masks, right? And his or her moral face consists of this incompatible but easily coexisting personas, right? And at the same time, the cynic is also the vehicle for the instrumental reason, as defined by Adorno and Horkheimer, right? As the reason that excludes any moral constraints and suggests using of the other as the means to the subjects or the system's ends, right? Plus, this ironic conformism and instrumental reason is coupled with the sense of self-righteousness, right? And cynical consciousness always presents itself as either realistic or the right thing. It is always the right thing to do, right? And there are works that allow to apply this concept to Soviet culture. And not sort of on the one hand, cynicism is characteristic of the position of power, right? The position of power and the strategy of power is based on cynicism, is based on ironic conformism and becoming more and more pronounced, right? So I like very much this quotation from Zizek, the paranoid Nazis really believed in the Jewish conspiracy, while the perverted Stalinists actively devised counter-revolution conspiracies as preemptive strikes. The greatest surprise for the Stalinist investigator was to discover that the subject accused of being a German or American spy really was a spy. In Stalinism proper, confessions counted only insofar they were false and exorbitant. This idea, surprisingly, becomes even more relevant when we're thinking about today's events, right? And furthermore, a cynical attitude towards the official ideology was what the regime really wanted. The greatest catastrophe for the regime would have been its own ideology to be taken seriously and realized by its subjects, right? In response to this, it is not only ideological sense, multiple cynical practices that constantly contradict each other and create the sense of confusion and chaos, right? On the one hand, we have this phenomenon of the Soviet con man, a Soviet imposter, as described in Sheila Fitzpatrick's famous book Theo of the Mask, where she basically argues that Ostap Bender is the Soviet subject that constantly cons the system, constantly survives by conning the system. Oleg Kharkordin, in his book on collective and the individual in Russia, also suggests that the constant switching between the intimate and the official, a curious kind of official self-training, a process that comes later, that the initial state of dissimulation conceived as a closing of притворство, and one that we may more aptly call dissimulation, as changing phases, лицемерие. But literally changing face, literally sort of being different. It is sort of the direct, I would say, embodiment of Sloterdijk's idea of the trickster split person. Although, by the way, quite paradoxically for Sloterdijk, the cynical age is sated with Weimar Republic, and he almost doesn't have any Soviet examples in his book. So what the trickster has to do with it, right? I think that the trickster sort of is associated with cynicism in the threefold way. On the one hand, the trickster embodies Soviet cynicism. On the other way, right, he or she deconstructs and resists Soviet cynicism. And in the third way, he or she justifies cynicism by his or her artistic performance. That's a strange connection, but think about this. If we think about this in terms of Soviet subjectivity, sort of a discussion about which is going for quite a while, the trickster, and especially the trickster that is funny, attractive, witty, etc., offers the alternative models for the subject, right? And these models are, on the one hand, justifying cynicism, on the other hand, giving certain equipment to resist to the sort of atmosphere of cynicism, and thirdly, sort of gives the aesthetic language for cynicism per se. So I will try to explain this better, because probably this sounds a little too abstract now, right? So here comes three sort of variations. So one variation is associated with what Sloterdijk calls cynic. Sloterdijk, as many of you know, he splits the concept of the cynicism into cynicism and cynicism, right? As we know, these are just two variations on the same Greek word, right? The dog, two traditions to pronounce it. But he makes them opposite, right? And he says that no critique can cope with the gelatinous realism of cynicism, and cynicism can be only stemmed by cynicism, not morality. Cynicism, cynical reason, he says, culminates in the knowledge decried as nihilism, that we must snub the great goals. In this regard, we can't be nihilistic enough. It's all very beautiful, but it's not very clear. His main example is of a cynic is Diogenes, right? And we certainly know all these legends about Diogenes, about his public masturbation, about his sort of thinking by the body, about his clownish performances that are at the same time forms of philosophical statement, right? And if we unpack this, we basically arrive to what Bakhtin associates with the carnival culture. I'm arguing that what Sloterdijk calls cynic, Bakhtin calls the carnival culture and carnival subject, basically, right? So low goes above the high, the corporeal above the spiritual, desacralization, profanation by the means of laughter, right? Grotesque combination of incompatible elements, mere relativity of being, and optimism, because nothing is final and everything is constantly in flux, right? So what is associated with the carnivalesque humor can be interpreted as cynical in Sloterdijk's terms, and I think that Evgeny Dobrenko in his keynote address to the recent Etzel, he sort of once again returned to the question of why would Bakhtin write the book about Rabelais in the midst of terror, right? And as you probably know, there are different approaches to this question, right? And Dobrenko basically said that what Bakhtin wrote is completely irrelevant to what was happening in the Soviet society at this time, and completely irrelevant to the function laughter played in the Soviet society, because it was not carnivalesque. It was very much the weapon of power, the weapon of humiliation, the weapon of violence, right? But I think that if we look at Bakhtin's book from this perspective, he was creating a very abstract a very philosophical model based on Rabelais, based on uh, sources that he analyzes, right, of the cynical laughter that can serve as the counterweight to the ubiquitous cynicism of the Soviet system, of Soviet society. So that's my interpretation, and it is confirmed by multiple oppositions between a cynical trickster and a cynic, right? So we can see Benya Krik versus Tartakovsky in Odessa Tales, uh, Ostap Bender versus Koreika, Walland and Company versus Muscovites, right? And Pontius Pilate appears as some kind of the god of cynicism, as sort of the super cynic, right? Venichka versus angels, and even if we look at Pelevin, Akhuli versus Sasha Ser. And in the more recent history, we see the Pussy Riot versus judges. Right. A good example here is the seance of the black magic in variety theater, where as you remember, Koroviev and Behemoth are very methodically downplaying all ambitions, all pretense, right, all appearances to very simple and very crude human desires. Right? It is a very carnivalesque scene, the most carnivalesque scene probably in the novel, which ends, as we remember, by people running naked because their clothing disappear, because the values that are not associated with the body, with the natural life, they turn out to be empty. That's the direct manifestation of cynicism, and I'm sure that Diogenes would have applauded to this event. And Sloterdijk, I don't know why, how he missed it. That's a mystery for me. Right. And as good examples, we can have Ostap, but Ostap mainly from 12 Chess. In 12 Chess, he is the cynic. Right, he is the cynic as opposed to surrounding him cynics. Right, a very important detail there, for example, is that remember they lose a big portion of their valuable time and eventually lose the chair. Why? Because they get 500 rubles from Kislersky in Petigorsk, right? And start drinking and have a drinking bout for 5 days. Then they travel to Yalta. And that's a very cynical gesture, I think. There's nothing calculated in this. Right? Buratino is again the cynical figure. Then later we see cynical tricksters in multiple works by Yuzha Lyshkovsky. Chonkin by Vainovich is also the cynical character, and return to the sort of cynicization of the figure of the fool, right? And even this brilliant performance of Ulyanov and Evstigniev in Aleph and Neuman's version of Bulgakov's Beg is indeed the performance of the interaction between a cynical trickster Chernota, played by Ulyanov, and a cynical trickster Krasukhin, played by Evstigniev. Right? Then this cynical critique continues in contemporary art, and the group Yeti and Tarek Kulik, right, and Mamashov Monroe's multiple gender transformations, gender acts, always with a very strong clownish and carnivalesque tint, and later on the works by the group Sinina, the Blue Noses. Even there, my favorite secular works, the Kitchen Suprematism, where they make suprematist compositions from cheese, bread, and sausage. It is very, very carnivalesque. It's transforming something abstract, something unmaterial, right? Something that is supposed to describe the cosmos into the pieces of food that certainly will be eaten after the end of the session with photographing, right? And I can see this strong presence of cynical carnivalesque humor both in the Pussy Riot's performance and in Femin's acts, and as you can see in this famous photograph. So this is one sort of aspect of the trickster and one image of the trickster, and you can see here that is this cynical trickster offering a resistance to cynicism? Indeed. Is the cynical trickster aestheticizing cynicism? Also, yes, indeed, because of course cynic is sort of cynical too, but in different way. Then there is another model of the trickster, which I call an ironic messiah, and I came to this thought when I realized that Bible publishes Benya Krik and Kanarme in the same year, and that for him Benya Krik is as associated with the revolution as Kanarme. And I would even argue that Benya Krik represents some kind of the utopian vision of the revolution. On the other hand, it is quite interesting that the historical Mishka Ponchik, his actual reign in Odessa falls onto the period of revolution from 1918 to 1919, right? But Bible, for some reason, sort of transfers him back into the pre-revolution period. And Mishka Ponchik couldn't be Benya Krik in pre-revolution period because, as we know, he, while a teenager, at the age of 14 or 15, he participated in the terrorist attack on the governor of Odessa. He basically exploded him and was sent to katorga and returned only with the revolution, and that's when his era began. So Bible moves it back into the pre-revolution time to show sort of the reason for the revolution and sort of the emergence of Messiah from ghetto. And this Messiah of the new modernity, right? This new modernity that is exactly manifesting chaos and freedom brought together. Chaos and freedom in one combination, right? And of course, messianic power of Benya Krik is also the power of the powerless, to use Václav Havel's words. And also, we cannot say that Benya is free of violence. He is not, right? But he is minimally violent, especially if we compare his violence with the world of Kanarme, right? And he is this messiah of what Ilya Gerasimov in his, I would say, eye-opening book calls the plebeian modernity. The modernity that formed through the self-organization of ethnic minorities, of criminal communities, and so that's what is the new Messiah bringing with him. But if we look at the literature, especially of the 20th, we see a number of works with this messianic tricksters, right? And they all are bringing this particular combination of chaos and freedom, right? Julio Jurenito, Lazik Shareshtvanic, I would say Sharikov too, although Sharikov is a very exceptional character. Ivan Babichev in Alesha's Envy as the counterweight to his brother Andrei Babichev, right? Bernhausen in Sigismund Klzhanovsky's novella, of course, Ostap Bender, of course, Walland and his retinue. And later on, we can see how this messianic figure returns in postmodernism. It's Venichka in Moscow to the End of the Line. It's Pushkin in Abram Terz, Strolls with Pushkin. It's again Münchhausen in Gorin and Zakharovs, that were Münchhausen, and it's again Ahuli in Victor Pelevin, right? So all these messiahs, they display a certain kind of relation to the sacred, right? They all conflate mythological subplots with contemporary issues. And all of these messiahs are defeated, but the legend continues to live, including texts that we read, right? Basically, all these messiahs display the combination of two features. One is profanation, because the mythological plot that is being taken there is being downplayed, deconstructed, ruined mainly. But at the same time, the new mythological plot is being presented in the very much unfitting way, right? So, I don't know, of course, Moskva-Petushki is the best example here for how Venichka proves the Бытие Божье, the being of God, through the analysis of hiccup. That's the Nevyazka, it's the Nyanov's instrument, but we can see it almost everywhere, right? Pushkin, Messiah that combines sort of such features as eroticism, emptiness, and vampirism. Right? How? Eroticism and vampirism is okay, but emptiness, what can we do with emptiness here, right? Benya Krik is also the very self-contradictory Messiah, and his narrative is self-contradictory. If you read attentively these 5 stories, in these 5 stories, we see 3 weddings, 2 of which belong to are weddings and associated with Benya. So he marries twice there, different women. He is depicted simultaneously as passionate, as sort of the expression of chaotic energy of heart, and very much calculating, very much sort of homo economicus, if one would like to use here the terminology of Adorno again. So Nevyazka is everywhere, but and this combination is quite informative because it basically undermines all attempts to create some kind of the unifocal vision, the vision around one concept, one theme, one axis, right? They always sort of going in multiple directions, and I call them deliberate or intuitive anti-essentialists, because they constantly destroy all attempts to essentialize. Even when they themselves try to create some kind of essentialistic concept, they end up dispersing it into the contradictory and very much ambivalent microconceptions. Quite interestingly, the Soviet Union ends with some kind of the farewell to this type, to this ironic messiah, and I find it quite symbolic that we see Oleg Yankovsky, this brilliant actor, first as Munchausen, I'm sorry, Munchausen, which is depicted as absolutely messianic character, right? If you remember, the finale of this novel, what I'm saying, play and film, is that Munchausen climbs the ladder going to heaven without having any like Jacob going up the Jacob's ladder, right? And he's depicted as a very funny character, but a character who nevertheless sort of says that he says truth. He never lies, right? And Munchausen is the Enlightenment clown who constantly lies, of course, right? And here, his truth becomes unbelievable, right? And then the same Oleg Yankovsky, plays Makarov in Roman Balayan's film "Полет во сне и наяву," flies in dreams and reality, where we see the trickster who is at the end of his rope, literally, right? And if Munchausen is climbing this ladder, Makarov at the end sort of is swinging on the rope swing and sort of jumps into the water, and then everybody thinks that he committed suicide, and he's sitting and shaking somewhere aside and watching how people mourn his death. I think it's unbelievable, and there is some kind of the very much not intentional but very profound dialogue between these 2 appearances of Yankovsky, separated by 2 or 3 years. Полет is 1982 and Munchausen is 1979. And of course, the aura of Munchausen was with Yankovsky. But there is also the third important variation of the trickster, and it reflects the trickster's relation to power. So basically, the trickster, quite typically, and especially in Soviet culture, um, accompanies the figure of power. And the role of the trickster next to the figure of power is sort of to soften the patron. Here is Menshikov next to Peter the Great. We may argue that Basmanov is the trickster that sort of softens the image of Ivan the Terrible in Eisenstein's second part of Ivan the Terrible, right? Bulgakov definitely creates the parody of this coupling, of this odd couple of the Tsar and the trickster in his Ivan Vasilievich, but also, of course, he touches upon another very important subject, the subject of the impostor. Impostor is indeed the trickster's function, right? And impostor, as Fitzpatrick shown, is the incredibly widespread social phenomenon, but also literary phenomenon. Of course, we have multiple imposters in Soviet culture, beginning with Nevzorovs from Alexei Tolstoy's novella Ibicus, или похождение Невзорова, Nevzorov's Travels, 1923 and 26. And it goes on, and basically I think that the Zolotoy Telenok, the Little Golden Calf, is the novel about sort of the society of impostors. So everybody is imposter, everybody pretends to be somebody else, and either to be in power while not having power, or other way around, as Koreika, who is a millionaire but pretends to be a quiet Soviet mouse, right? And Ostap Bender sort of methodically destroys all these positions of imposter, showing that there is no basis for any power, that the power is standing on the empty ground, right? And in this respect, his finale, of course, is sort of predicted or even predirected by his own actions. The power has no ground. The power has to perish. And the fact, I think that this transformation of the character. You remember that 12 Studios, the 12 chairs, where, as I said, Ostap is a cynical character, right? And into Zolotoy Telenok, where he is both the ironic messiah and sort of the one who destroys different forms of power, from economic to political and artistic even, right? What surprised them, 28, and then the first version of Zolotoy Telenok, 31. It is the moment when Stalin's ascension happens, right? And Stalin sort of claims the power. The question about sort of whether it is a new form of imposter, whether a new imposter takes the throne, right, and claims to be Czar. It is a very relevant question, although, of course, Ilyich Petrov were very loyal Soviet writers, and they didn't want to emphasize it. But the trickster sort of does his work without asking the authors whether they want him to do it or not, right? Then about the same time, we see how the former leaders are retired into tricksters. And if you watch with today's eyes, Mikhail Rome's Lenin in October, you will see that Babichev plays Lenin as a clown. His entire body language, his entire sort of posture is extremely clownish and not accidentally. As Arkady Blumbaum mentioned when he heard one of my presentations, Boris Shukin, by his amplua, was a comical actor, and casting Lenin for the comical actor was a very daring gesture by Rome, I would say. Right, but then we see another very interesting phenomenon, and that's all in the same realm. I decided to do a paper, and Ainsley knows about this, about Schwartz's tricksters in Schwartz's plays. And suddenly I realized that Schwartz doesn't like tricksters very much. and told his tricksters, with one pretty weak exception, they are all in power. But they're in power in a particular way. They are like this, like Menshikov towards Peter the Great. They're associates of the tyrannical figure, right? And associates that on the one hand mirror and double the more or less hidden tricksters figures. On the other hand, create some kind of parody. Uh, but mainly we see that this character is super cynical. There is nothing cynical there. This is very cynical character. This is a conformist, super conformist, right? But this conformity is displayed through exuberant, excessive performance. Uh, and there is some kind of excess of performativity that all of Schwarz's tricksters display. Think about Burgomister, who constantly pretends to be crazy, and while being crazy produces fountains of most comical aphorisms. The funniest things in this play are said by Burgomister, right? Or the first minister in The Naked King, right? Basically, they play about tricksters, but he overplays those tailors who are supposed to be tricksters, right? Or the minister administrator in the Ordinary Miracle. Again, absolutely stunning character, absolutely stunning trickster, whose excess of sort of he makes the his own self-erasure through conformism spectacular. That's an amazing effect. We see something similar when we look at Iskandar Sandro of Chegem, who is also conformist, who is also cynical. But his cynicism is also spectacular, and this is especially seen in this famous novella, the Balthazar's Feast, where Sandro dances before Stalin, and not only dances, he slides on his knees with his eyes closed to demonstrate how blindly he dedicated to the leader. Right? But while doing this, he sort of gets a certain advantages. He gets the piece of power. He gets a piece of respect. He judges Stalin, etc., etc. He's doing all these things simultaneously. So this is this cynical trickster which displays the triumph of conformism. Doubles the figure of tyrannical power, spectacle of self-negation, the excess of performativity, and willingly or not, there is a deconstruction of power. There is a deconstruction of cynicism by the method of over-identification, by the method, we may call it, using another terminological tradition, subversive affirmation. Right? It's so conformist that it becomes a parody of itself, right? It's so glorifying the power that it becomes a mockery of power, right? Later, Sotsar will be built, it just takes this over-identification, tricksters over-identification as a separate device. But cynical tricksters are doing this already. Cynical tricksters are doing this already, and this is why the conformism is also quite refreshing. Um, what is said to be the culture of Steuben is so brilliantly described by Alexei Yurchak, is also based on the over-identification and subversive affirmation. So it's also some kind of the massivization of this cynical trickster. But it is exactly this very principle that becomes the principle of the political, not only political representation in post-Soviet culture. And what I think triggers a very negative attitude to the tricksterdom, which we can see in many texts and films. Right? Of course, Zhirinovsky here is the symbolic figure, because he is that cynical trickster who willingly or not, it's the clinical question. It's for his psychiatrist, sort of over produces conformity, right? But the effect is ambivalent. On the one hand, he mocks it. On the other hand, he constantly extols benefits from this position. And just think about the fact that he's probably the longest living politician in post-Soviet Russia. His career begins in the late 80s, and he was in the first more or less relaxed parliament, right, in the Verkhovny Soviet. And since then, he still sits in Duma. I don't think there is anybody else who can brag to be such a sort of long-standing politician, right? And we can see these combinations in multiple characters of today's Russia, including the political show business figures, right, like Ksenia Sobchak, or Zolostanov, or Kiselev, or Solovyov, or anybody else. So if we are looking at the, okay, so that's continuous here, right? Sorry, and of course Putin frequently uses these technologies, and frequently appears as this cynical trickster for our enjoyment, so to speak. I would only give 3 examples of how this cynical trickster being represented in culture. So first of all, the TV series The Home Arrest, Домашний Arrest, where we see that this is the story, as you probably know, of the corrupt mayor who has been, during the investigation of his corruption, placed under the home arrest, but his home, according to official documentation, according to his registration, is in the communal apartment. And so he has to return from his palace to the communal apartment, to the room where he used to live in his childhood, right? And face all neighbors, etc., etc. And what we see here, that all people around him, ordinary people with of course one romantic exception, they are all cynical, right? And he's incredibly cynical, but he has this excess of performativity that makes him, of all people, the most corrupt, suddenly most artistic, and therefore attractive, right? So there is some kind of overcoming of cynicism by artistry, by artistism. Another example, recent version of Dead Souls by Grigory Konstantinopolsky. And the concept is very similar. Everybody is cynical here. And furthermore, here everybody is the cynical trickster. And basically, all Gogol's characters fit this model very well, with the exception, of course, there is one non-trickster, and who is that's Plushkin, played by Alexei Sebrikov. But Chichikov, certainly Chichikov, who represents as we learn in the end, sorry for the spoiler, he appears as the FSB officer. He is the super trickster because the state is the trickster. So basically, what this version of the Dead Souls depicts that we not only have the society of tricksters, we have the state that operates as the trickster, and this is the modus operandi everywhere. And the third example are, there is no need to cite them, all these famous microfilms, micro narratives from Shnur, made for Shnur's stories. Not all of them, for me, very important. Here are the famous exhibit, right? Louboutin, the how it's called, ecstasy, right? The Просто Космос Stas, and the candidate. And what we see here is the following: in all these stories and all these performances, we see failing tricksters. All these protagonists want to be tricksters. They desire to be tricksters. They act like tricksters, but they nevertheless fail. And that's normal for the trickster to fail, as a matter of fact. But here, being the trickster is having a different meaning, because the trickster is the path to the social success. The one who is, all successful people are the tricksters. Everybody is sort of tricking each other. And his characters are trying to sort of reach out and to jump out of their social cell, and cannot. Quite notably, the heroine of the exhibit cannot cross the threshold. She falls down before the door. And in the same way, the protagonist, the imposter, in the ecstasy, cannot cross the border. He's stopped there because of his death. So for them, the tricksterdom is the only way to be assimilated into the successful society. But certainly they cannot do this, right? And here my main conclusions, and the only one thing that I want to say that these characters are sort of opposite to what we see, for example, in the home arrest. They also have excess, but this is cynical excess that appears in drinking, in sexuality, in wild freedom, in completely unmotivated and very much sort of down to earth things that make them sympathetic, and that equals to their form of protest, weak but gratifying. I thought that the story of the Soviet trickster has ended with the Soviet epoch, but as you can see, it surprisingly continues. So the trickster is still not a dead figure, and still is a productive cultural archetype that deserves our attention.
There's a lot to think about, and it's fun, and I like the pictures. And I personally learned a lot about some movies that I should look for on YouTube or somewhere. I don't watch very many of Russian movies, and I've never heard of this, but Mертвые души with an FSB officer sounds like something I wouldn't mind.
Well, that's an amazing version.
Oh, yeah?
We had a big discussion about it at the Harriman, and I think that's one of the best TV series of the last.
Okay, well, sold. Then see, I learned something in Netflix recommendation as well. But my preferences in movies aside, I think we would probably have a lot of good serious questions. And I know we have some people in the audience who might even have their own take on tricksters.
I have a question about the Soviet tricksters and the cynical contrast, and also when you brought in this idea of ironic messiah, because to me, when I think about both the way you have laid it out and my own kind of concept of different sorts of Soviet tricksters, it seems to me like what you are calling cynical, often these figures have a kind of naivete. And I wonder how naivete squares with irony, right? I just, for me, there's a kind of a disconnect there a little bit, right? Like it almost seems like if you have that stance of not knowing everything, then it's hard for there to be irony involved in that. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you, Enzo. Thank you so much. But first of all, I said irony with the Messiah, not with the cynic, right? Second of all, if you remember, I don't want to turn on the PowerPoint again. For me, the very important part of the trickster's trope is metaposition. Metaposition means being outside, right? But one can be outside, sort of looking from the above at the happening and looking ironically, right? And being outside, being below understanding, right? As Bakhtin writes about the full jester and rogue, that they have the right not to understand. They have the privilege not to understand, right? And fool as one of the forms of the trickster is a paradoxical form, right? It is the trickster who does tricks involuntarily. The fool doesn't want to do something ironic, but it just happens. So remember how it is in fairy tales, right? So the fool learns some proverbs, right, and uses them, right? And for instance, he sees people carrying dead bodies, and he says, "Носить вам не переносить." I don't know how to translate this, right? So more the merrier, let's say, right? And so that's the trick, right? And that's exactly fits the cynical trickster. The cynical trickster just downplays. He goes always down. He goes from high, lofty, solemn, ideological, cultural into the life of the body, into sperm and shit and what's not, right? And does this without any big plan, right? Chongqing here is a very good example. Or Arishkovsky's Nikolai Nikolaevich also, right? Sort of, there is no intention to criticize the system. His main power is sort of hypersexual gift, right? But that's what makes him some kind of the critic of the system from the side of the body, basically. That's what Arishkovsky does in all his works, right? Body criticizes mind, system, everything that is not associated with the life of the body. Right. So I think that it is about metaposition. Metaposition can be ironic, can be not ironic, can be foolish. Right. And that's naivety.
I guess I'm also curious about it seems to me like the cynical model has so much to do with some of these everyday practices, stuff like reading between lines, right? Understanding different levels of discourse. So it's almost like on the one, maybe the cynic is both not, is maybe below, is unaware, but then also existing in a plane where that kind of knowledge can just not exist, right? And that's where you get the freedom. Mm-hmm.
I think so. I think, of course, you see, we have to understand that then when we're talking about cynicism, we're talking not only about literary or cinematic characters, right? Cynicism is sort of the mode of existence. And when we are talking about ironic messiahs, cynical tricksters in relations with the power, we are talking about cultural models that, as I said, they on the one hand represent cynicism, on the other hand deconstruct cynicism, and on the third hand, if there is a third hand, right, they aestheticize and provide the aesthetic justification. So there is constant pull and push. There is no clear-cut division here, of course. There is no clear-cut attitude that might be presented. But that explains why they're so popular.
I cannot say anything except for fascination with Mark Stock. Thank you very much. It's fun. You know, it's fun. It's a wonderful topic because it kind of conveys the core character of trickster as it exists in literature, and more so in literature than in philosophy, sorry to say, because for some reason the philosophy makes it really dumb, you know, and quite boring, especially Zizek. However, when it comes to literature, it conveys the whole spirit of the literature dedicated to tricksters in this whole tradition, and especially in Soviet, I think, Belet, not just Ostap Bender, but for example, Andrei Babichev from Yuri Alesha's Envy as well, or Kavalerov for that matter, because for me, the sense of the envy is altogether that Alesha actually wrote something even much more trickster than 12 Chairs, because all his personages, all his personas in this novel are tricksters. And it's like the war between tricksters. Envy is actually about the war between tricksters, the envy between tricksters. And that's why I think after Ilf and Petrov read the envy, they really failed with Zolotoy Telenok, because they tried to write something more engaging and more, I would say, powerful in the sense of laughter and carnival than did Alesha. And so I'm just fascinated with the very fact that I think that with all my kind of irony in general towards literary theory, except for Russian formalism and kind of general disdain to much later studies, I find that this is one of the few concepts that stems from a literary theory and actually comes from anthropology that makes sense. And I am really happy that you were the one who took this concept and applied it properly, because usually literary theory is not applied properly. But here it is. It gives the answers to lots of questions that are related to how this Plutovskoy Roman found such a generous soil in the Soviet times, and how it basically failed to exist in post-Soviet. And I think it will be very interesting, to compare the trickster novels of the Soviet times with the wider context of the post-Soviet cynical writing, especially Pelevin or Sorokin. And I don't want to denigrate them. It just does not compare.
Thank you, Andrea. You're very kind and very generous, and I really appreciate it. And your praise means a lot for me. If I may, I would like to take on Andrea's thought about envy. My reading is not as radical as yours. I don't think that they all four main characters are the tricksters. There is a very, I think that there are two tricksters, two non-tricksters, right? And as many may remember, on the one hand, there is Andrei Babichev, revolutionary constructor of the Четвертак, sort of the Командир производства, Bolshevik, right? And his foster son, Volodya Makarov, who says that he wants to be a machine. Of course, right? Who wants to be a machine? Who was taken very seriously as the new Soviet man. And Andrei suggests that he is pretending, and that's the thought that never crossed my mind, but now you've planted it, and I will be thinking this thought. But to other characters, Nikolai Kovalerov and especially Ivan Babichev, they're definitely the tricksters. Kovalerov maybe to a less extent, although he says that here is Andrei Babichev, а я Николай Kovalerov его шут. I'm his jest, directly uses this form, right? But when we are reading about Ivan Babichev, that's exactly where we say ironic messiah, because he directly is depicted as a person who repeats Christ's miracles, but in the reverse order. He comes to the wedding and turns all wine into water, right? And many other, and he calls himself, I'm the king of Король Пошляков, right? And there is a parody of the dialogue between Pilate and Christ in the interrogation of Ivan Babichev at GPU. So it is like that. And I started thinking that so the Kovalerov and Ivan Babichev, they're suggesting not, as typically says, sort of the old world, the fail is no, they're suggesting different understanding of modernity. They're suggesting the machine that you cannot see, but it exists. The machine of dreams, the machine of unconscious, right? They're saying that modernity is not about mechanisms, it's about unconscious. It's about how to manipulate what people can formulate, and in the long run, I would say that they're right. But most importantly, we understand that the tricksters are more moral than the builders of the New World, because there is this motif of Jocasta, how we say this, right? So the wife of Oedipus,
Jocasta.
The wife of Oedipus, and the mother of Oedipus, right? So all this Oedipal story is going on through the novella, and in the culmination moment, Ivan Babichev realizes, he didn't know that this official whom Kovalerov plans to kill, or promises to kill, assassinate, is his brother. And he stops it, and he says, Валя, выколи мне глаза, я не хочу это видеть. He becomes Oedipus, right? And then follows the scene with the famous scene with the shared Anya Prokopovich bed, sort of, which is traditionally interpreted as the failure. That's where they go into Mishyanskое болото, but that's something absolutely opposite. They refuse to kill. They refused to take the violent path. They take the life of cynics, the life of Diogenes, and that is their victory rather than their failure. So I think I agree with Andrea that Zavist is absolutely endless and bottomless novel, which produces more and more interpretations every decade. But I am completely mesmerized by it. I agree.
I want to jump in and say that for those who are interested, and for you maybe, Mark, we did have a talk on Alyosha's envy here in an interesting context. Yelena Zotova spoke about the concept of envy in the Soviet literature, and it was in connection with Alexander Green, and yeah, so it was.
Find it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's in the archives, I think. When you said it's the archetype, of course, it's an archetype. I'm thinking, you know, if we go all the way back in times, if you take Hopi Native American tribes, then they have shaman figures who are also jokers, and they have the magical power. And so, you know, the poetry and the chants that they create are also in jest, and they excuse, they could, you know, they could spill paint all over or do something naughty, but they're also magicians. So of course, it's probably the part of it, like especially say Bulgakovian tricksters, they certainly have that appeal, and maybe there's something that rubs off. And then as we go to the post-Soviet times, it completely fades, you know, like a paint off, because that, you're right, you know, they are detestable. And if we look, and you had a lot of examples on the modern to us, I wouldn't call it culture, but the whole environment, you know, if you study mass media or social media, it's all a smirk, right? So in Russian, there's so many words to it, like stёбо, подъёбка, right? And everything is done with that. If you read Russia Today, RT, or speaking, it's all, none of it is serious. It's all in a trickster, but in a very unpleasant, unappealing kind of tricksterish way. And it made me think, like, how does it change? It's true, those are likable, like Munchausen, and Margarita Simonyan is not. And so it's something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarina. And indeed, this transformation is what puzzles me too, because also we see how the tricksters discourse, sorry for this word, that more or less I made all this caveats, but it was a form of cultural resistance, right? It was a form of counterculture, right? How it is completely hijacked by the power. And it, looking back at the 30s, etc., I'm trying to argue that it was there already. It just coexisted with different forms of trickster manifestations, and now it's becoming the dominant form, right? And that's what makes it so so scary that when I don't know, Putin flies with cranes. If it is serious, that then his place is in the mental institution, right? But it is not. And we understand it, right? He's doing it with sort of, yes, I'm God, but I'm, you know, winking to you, right? When he gets out of this sea with two amphoras, not just one, two amphoras in his hands that he supposedly found at the bottom. What is it if not the ironic messianism, right? So he came out. It is the Ichthyander, right, which is a very Christological character in Soviet culture. So all these acts are quite there, and they're quite ugly. I don't
Yeah.
want to.
I'm sure there is somebody like Surkov who's sitting there and producing this, you know, as a
Yeah, not anymore though. But then, okay, if I may continue, we saw how this became the global phenomenon. Uh, uh, we lived through Trump's presidency, which was exactly the same phenomenon, right? I was at the talk of Peter Pomerantsev, who wrote this book about post-Soviet cynicism, right? You know, okay, sure. And he said I was writing this book, and was when I was finishing the first one, everything. How it's
true and nothing is real.
Nothing is true, everything is possible.
Yeah.
The adventures in modern Russia.
Yeah.
And he was saying that when I was finishing that book, I was thinking that's the local case. There's a local case, and in the Western world, where we have honest journalism, where we have fact-checking, where we have the system of checks and balances, all this crap is not possible. And little did I know. That was his words. Right? And he finished this book in 2014.
Yeah.
Right, and his next book is sort of looking at, on the one hand, of the earlier forms of this process in Zhirinovsky, etc., and at the later forms of this process globally across the world. So look at another thing. The last pre-pandemic year, two most important films in the world cinema: The Joker and The Parasite. Both films are about the tricksters. In the Joker case, it's sort of failing trickster, the trickster who wants to be the trickster because everybody, the success equals being the trickster. The character played by Robert De Niro is indeed the trickster, but he fails, he can't, right? But he becomes the force of the revolution, right? And on the other hand, the trickster conformists who are trying to assimilate, who are trying to cross the class gap and sort of climbing this stairs all the time, and also fail, right? Trying to create the revolution through trickster fails, and trying to be a conformist and get social success through trickster also fails. But other sort of scenarios are not viable. These are most viable scenarios. These are most interesting. They're full of energy, and that's why these films are so brilliant. So the trickster is the global problem now, but it is the case where I would say former Soviet Union has the most experience, and maybe the entire Eastern Bloc. I don't know very well Czech or Polish or Romanian tricksterdom, although I'm pretty sure that there are quite a few examples there, because the sort of the spectrum of tricksters operations and tricksters discourses is very broad, and I think may explain something to the world we are living into now.
So much. I was thinking it. I relate to it so much because I don't know if many people saw, but today, by our time, by the United States time, but European yesterday, there was an annual address to the nation by Putin, which was projected on the most buildings, like tall buildings, skyscrapers, all around the Russian cities. So there's this giant, kind of like a Wizard of Oz, totally Wizard of Oz image. And like below, underneath, there are other things happening. And this image, what is that if it's not a trickster? Like totally Wizard of Oz is another one of those, right?
Oh yeah, Wizard of Oz is.
Yeah.
But this reminds Brazil most of all.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Terry Gilliam. Right,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Please.
Yeah. Oh, is such a rich topic because I mean, all the politics of modern day aside, of course, we have Till Eulenspiegel, which is also quite a phenomenon. And I'm very familiar with Flemish culture because I have family there. And guess what? Till Eulenspiegel is not nearly as popular with the Flemish people or in Belgium, as this novel is in Russia, where everybody loved it and grew up on it. And they're like, huh? Yeah, what? And it's written in French anyway by Charles de Cosse. It's not written in Flemish or in Dutch, or Flemish dialect. But it certainly appeals, and we love Tillul and Spiegel when we grow up. So here's that. And there are so many, and I'm glad that you brought up Lenin too. Tomorrow is Lenin's birthday, and Lenin is one, I believe, is the biggest trickster of them all.
At least in the Soviet culture, he is, right? Indeed, indeed.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, and I really look forward to reading the book when it comes out. And I was a little bit, I'm not sure why I was shocked, but I was a little bit shocked when I put all the writers, especially the early Soviet writers that you mentioned, and all of them majority of them happen to be part of the kind of Odessa writing circle. So is that a coincidence, and do you address that in your writing?
I don't address it specifically. But I also don't think that it is a coincidence, right? Because first of all, Odessa indeed was the source of many talents at that moment, right? And some of these talents are quite unpredictable. Do you know that Bakhtin spent his formative years in Odessa, or Lydia Yakovlevna Ginsburg? You know about Chukovsky probably, but we never think about Zhitkov as Odessa native. So it was a big sort of productive hub, so to speak, right? And I think the main reason for this productivity is that indeed Odessa was the multi language and multicultural realm. It was the place where several cultures crossed, right? It was not only we all know about Russian, Ukrainian, Jewish, but it was Greek and Persian and many other influences. And this sort of cultural exchange was important. Another thing was that Odessa was an important hub during the process of immigration. Right, and for a couple of years, not for a couple of, Andrei will correct me, maybe for a year or two, Odessa was sort of the new edition of Petersburg, where all important, many important literati and artists and even editions were there, and that played a formative role and influenced many people of this generation, right? But also, of course, they all escaped Odessa. Those who remained in Odessa remained unknown or forgotten, maybe not for good reason, right? But they all had to escape Odessa, and Odessa wasn't the place that they could realize their talents. So I think that for them, Odessa was, and the tricksters motif. On the one hand, there is this probably, although it's hard to say, it was created exactly by these very writers. The idea of some kind of the cult of the trickster, admiration for the trickster, right? The trickster's epic tales about different characters, right? And it's really hard to say whether it was invented or whether this real characters inspired these inventions, right? But that. I think that's the only explanation that I can produce.
Very keen observation about Odessa. It's for a few years, especially after the revolution, it became an enclave for those who were flying from the north, especially from Petersburg, right, from Petrograd, sorry. And so about until 1919, when the mass exodus happened with the Red Army taking over this part of Malorussia, or the Ukraine now, Odessa fell into unbelievable provincial, kind of decadence, I would say. So all the literary forces that started there, they had to move out, and that's how you had the conclave. Instead of Odessa being an enclave, you have the Odessan conclave in Moscow, right? Gazeta Gudok and everybody else, and not just Odessa, but the whole, South, what Shklovsky called Southwestern Literary School. They all moved to Moscow, where they were much more successful than even the Muscovites. So I have one more question, Mark, about the fine line, because I mean, it's unfortunate Ansley left, because I really wanted to talk about Vaginov, and that kind of in terms of what you said about trickster and about cynicism. So that the trickster, in a sense, is not as cynical as the cynic is. And it's especially visible in Vaginov's novels, you know, because you have Trudy Dni Svistonova, where Svistonov is a complete cynic. You know, I think he is more cynic because he's just detached. And then, yeah, and then you have Kozlinaia Pesnya, and there you have a trickster in the face of неизвестный poet who actually doesn't try to be a cynic. So he's almost like he's a trickster. Look how he depicts all these characters, especially from Bakhtin's circle, right? Who are there because that's why it's Romana Clef. So you have the prototypes for almost each of the characters. And recently I wrote about one of the characters in this novel, poet Sentyabin, whose prototype was never under discussion. It was obvious that was poet Benedict Mart, who came to Leningrad, and then, you know, he was exiled to Saratov, and then he lived in Kiev, the father of the famous emigre Russian poet Ivan Yelagin. And then I looked at this dialogue, because the chapter 9, you know, poet Sentyabin, the 9 months, all those things is dedicated to his dialogue with неизвестный poet, where неизвестный poet, trying to be as cynical as possible, can't manage, you know. And so throughout the novel, there is always this denouement of somebody who tries to be a cynic and doesn't quite get to this level, as it was expressed, for example, in Svistonov, but he is still a trickster. So my question would be whether you agree with this. I mean, I wouldn't say juxtaposition, but there is, in my opinion, certainly a demarcation line between a cynic, an utter cynic, and a trickster. And if so, where do you think this demarcation line falls?
The demarcation line definitely exists, of course. But I don't completely agree that неизвестный poet is the trickster, because he's not funny. For me, laughter is a very important aspect. But if you look at him as the sort of the source of depiction of characters in this circle, of sort of the source of this grotesque caricatures, then you're bringing in the comedic note. It takes some trick to make him a trickster, I would say. So there is this question. So, but returning to the distinction between the trickster and the cynic is exactly, I think, that the trickster is not pragmatic. The trickster is aesthetically oriented, right? The trickster does this for the sake of performance, for the sake of fun, so to speak, right? And that's why, by the way, the best illustration to this is the finale of Zolotoy Telenok that Andrei doesn't like, which I do. And Ilfin Petrov were trying to show that there is no room for the millionaire in the Soviet country, which doesn't make any sense, right? Because first of all, just a few pages ago, they depicted Koreyka. Second of all, they also depicted that underneath the official economics exists a very thick layer of non-official economics, and suddenly Ostap forgets about all this and tries to spend his money legally. Is he an idiot? What happened to him? Brain damage? But the logic here is different. He cannot enjoy the money because he didn't do this for the money. It wasn't for the money, right? For him, wastefulness is more organic than having them. He tries to waste them, right? He tries to get rid of them, and therefore his apparent fiasco at the eyes of Dniester is his return to himself. He's free again. He gets rid of everything, right? He returns to life, and that's the trickster. The trickster does this not for the sake of the money or the gain or the profit, and cynic is doing everything for the profit. And using everyone and everything, right? So that's exactly the instrumental reason, right? I think that the main distinction, it's not as tangible as one would want it to be. It's also the method of interpretation. We should look at it and we can say, no, it's not like that, but
Okay.
That's where the aesthetic sense becomes the driving force.
Brilliant. That's the answer I expected. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think you didn't kill any animals with the one rock, but you certainly, I think you kind of answered also why we like the Soviet time tricksters and don't like the post-Soviet, because those are they're more cynic, all the examples that you gave, at least the ones that I know, they're more cynics than tricksters, and that's why they're unlikable to us, at least. Yeah, makes sense. Well, and I don't want to sound on behalf of Globus as like, you name it, we got it, but we surely do have the talk on Vaginov with Ansley and Geoff Cibula. That was great. I really recommend it for anyone who wants to learn more about Vaginov and his work, and the Goat Song and all the other works that Andrei and Mark mentioned. And there was something else that, yeah, just check it out. We have a lot of different things out there. And of course, we have all these books as well. If you want to read the original and go to the source, which I recommend in the first place, we have them in Russian and in English, and hopefully in good translations. So that's an invitation to
the Goat Song is still not translated. Actually, it is Ansley who is translating the Goat Song.
I know, and that's why I invite people to the show.
Right.
They read from there. They read big chunks of it with Geoff. But we did have it in Russian. We actually don't have right now. I have to order some more. So.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I don't have much, but this is wonderful. Thank you so much for the talk. But I was just wondering, the way we're talking about the difference between this post-Soviet trickster and the Soviet trickster, I think with this focus on instrumental reason, sort of reminds me of Kundera's concept of laughable laughter, and sort of and there's a certain seriousness that is committed to, that sort of you lose this freedom because you're sort of focused on this instrumental. And I wonder if we don't like it because there's a lack of this new character, because there's this lack of capability of being free in this kind of chaotic orientation and this rejection, this sort of revolutionary of perhaps, I don't know, it's not much of a question. It was just an observation. So that's all I have.
No, it makes perfect sense for me, and that basically confirms the idea that is quite dear for me, that this semantics of the trickster as the manifestation of this sort of unbreakable combination of chaos and freedom, the dangerous chaotic freedom and liberating chaos. It remains despite all transformations and all sort of technicalities and manifestations of this trope. Right, I agree with you. And Kundera is right into this early with his joke, especially, I think, and of course laughable loves.
Thank you so much. I waited for this talk for so long. I actually thought it was on March 21st, and I wrote an angry message. I'm so sorry. like I was really expecting to hear this talk. Thank you so much. And I had a question about this, like the nature of tricksters. Do you think that it is essential for a trickster to be conscious? I mean, well, what I'm talking about is, can we think about children or young adolescent in like film or literature, Soviet film or literature, who are naive, absolutely, and innocent? And I'm thinking right now about a wonderful film made by Bloomberg sisters, where a little girl interprets all the Soviet idioms in like the direct way, and that creates comical effect, and that creates this like the effect of revelation, the truth. But she is definitely unaware of her position of being like outsider, or her position of like ironic reinterpretation of like the Soviet everyday reality. So to what extent do you think being a trickster means being aware of, I don't know, tricksterness?
Trickster strategy, right?
Yeah. So because I'm really well, I'm working on some projects in animation, and I can't stop thinking about many, especially surprisingly female characters in Soviet animation, like these little girls who turn everything like upside down, just because they behave not according to this like common rule, common sense. But I every time stop myself thinking about them as about tricksters, because they are mainly like unaware of what they confront this way.
I'm very intrigued by your project, and I want to know more about it. So, and because I'm also a big fan of Soviet animation, and especially the theme of the female trickster is always is underdeveloped due to the sort of patriarchal nature of Soviet culture, which sets lots of limits, and what is as an acceptable transgression for a male figure is unacceptable transgression for a female figure, and childhood here is a very productive area, of course. I think that the trickster can be unconscious, right? And while answering Anya's question, I think I was talking about the same thing. The fool is an unconscious trickster. The fool is not intentionally producing the effects that are characteristic of the trickster, right? And the child can do this as well, right? In children's literature, furthermore, children's culture, let's be more inclusive. There is a more or less set role for the trickster. Sort of there is a very habitual version of the trickster, shalun, shalunishka. That's the trickster, right? Shalasti, mischief, right? That's quite normal. And from this perspective, we consider that the trickster is present in children's literature all the time, right? And the trickster, the problem here again, typically in traditional, more or less traditional, I'm not talking here about folklore, because in folklore it's either ambivalent or very positive attitude to such a character. But in the traditional children's literature, the attitude to Shalun is negative. Shalun has to be changed, has to be educated. But I should admit that the very idea of sort of this study of the trickster came to me when with my friends Ilya Kukulin and Masha Mayofis, we were doing the collection of articles Veselые человечки, which was sort of the child of love, because the idea came to us during the conference, and we produced it within 1 year. So everybody whom we invited to this volume wrote articles with incredible speed. It's unbelievable to have 1 year from the idea of the volume with multiple authors and to the actual book. And then when we were editing and sort of rereading, I suddenly realized that the majority of these favorite characters of children's culture from the, we were mainly looking at 60s, 80s, right? From, of course, we had Lenin, Volodya Ulyanov, but main focus was from the 60s to 80s. They are tricksters. They are tricksters, and they're really favorite. They are really absolutely they are beloved characters. And okay, beginning with Buratino, right? Buratino, Khatabich, and then all these adopted characters like Carlson, for example. Carlson is a very good example, as you probably know, that despite the very brilliant character of Lindgren's books, in Swedish culture, Carlson is perceived not as a lovable character, as an ambivalent at best, as a betrayal. He betrays the kid all the time, right? He leaves him to explain his actions. But in was it Stepantsov cartoon, right? Who made these two animated films on Carlson? But Stepantsov, I think, right? He was presented as an absolutely sensationally charming trickster, and quite notably, the second film was ending by his concert, by his performance, where he appeared in the images of Shalyapin. How would children recognize that as Shalyapin, right? that was absolutely double encoding, right? It was done for the adult audience, and that was the winning trickster. And the fact that next to him was Freckenborg, but Freckenborg was speaking with the voice of the most famous female trickster in Soviet culture, Faina Ranievskaya, made this entire project the celebration of the trickster. So it is very interesting how Soviet children's culture is trickster-centric, I would say. And yes, indeed, there are conscious and unconscious, right? For instance, my favorite children's trickster is Yuri Nagivin's story Komarov, where Komarov constantly is creating this 4-year-old boy constantly creating mischief, right? And sort of is this wild spirit of freedom. It's quite interesting text in this respect. But female characters are even more interesting. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mark. I know I'll be thinking about all of this and following up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Thank you for your faces. It was such a pleasure to lecture to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear
Bye-bye.
audience. Everybody stay safe and well, and come back and visit soon.